Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast, and it's my absolute delight today to be talking to my dear friend, my colleague, somebody that I have spent the most wonderful time with, talking in the lab, out of the lab, and had the great good fortune to watch you present. You're a legend. Carol Davis, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you, always.
So I'm going to give everyone your title, just so they get just how smart you are. As an Emeritus Professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, you were training practitioners, and I want to ask you if you were training them in medicine or physical therapy or ... Would you say that we're all working in the healing arts in various mediums?
Ideally. But in the structure of the academy, we have to be bound by certain rules, competency rules, and accreditation rules that dictate that there is a curriculum that needs to be followed. And in that curriculum, we have to show how, for example, in the Department of Physical Therapy, how our vision, mission, and goals are aligned with the School of Medicine and aligned with the American Medical Association and the American Physical Therapy Association. And as a consequence, when I began to explore for my doctoral students in physical therapy and also tangentially in medicine, in seminars, evidence of the impact of subtle energy on healing systems and how the gold standard that we use in research in medicine, the randomized controlled trial that with control and placebo arm, really doesn't lend itself to research on what's effective in function in human beings. It lends itself to pharmaceuticals and chemistry, things that don't vary from moment to moment, but people vary. And so we needed to be able to explore how we might look at outcomes of our measures and the things that we're doing that go beyond grouping people in similar groups and doing the same thing with people the same day or over a period of time, pretending that nothing changed. We needed to look at outcomes other than the measurements of pain and function that we were using to say, yes, this was an effective therapy or not. And as it turns out, the most effective outcomes are grounded in subjectivity. And science has always stated subjectivity. There's no place for subjectivity because we interfere with validity and reliability when we talk about what did the patient experience, what did the physical therapist experience. And so that was materialistic science. That was the science that I grew up in. That's the science I did my research in. That's the science I did my case studies in and how I reported them, because I tried to do a randomized trial, but the journal didn't accept it because the N wasn't large enough. So I tried to play the game. Your question, are we involved in healing sciences? We're involved in trying to teach and train ways of thinking and performing that help people improve and come back into balance. My personal view about the criteria that we use for effectiveness is that those criteria are not as effective as they could be. And so I hold with those scientists that lean toward post-materialistic science, science that allows a window for mystery, for case reports, for different kinds of reporting that allows subjectivity under certain constraints to make sure that we're not just making up snake oil ideas.
For sure.
But follows scientific rigor. Long answer to a short question.
It's a brilliant answer, Carol, because I truly respect it from, let's say, the point of view of anatomy. I've studied a great deal of it. I wouldn't call myself an anatomist because I'm not in the league of people like John Sharkey with his clinical anatomy training that took years and such detail.
Right.
However, I know he endorses an aspect of what we're saying just on a simple level. When I went back to Bernard Siegfried Albinus' book on anatomical examples that Jan van der Laar drew, and back in the day, those exquisite drawings where they took the cadavers that they had permission to draw and hung them on nets and did the exquisite lithographs that when you look at them, there was always a reflection of nature, of what you might call real life, of mythology, of the remembrance that that being that resided in that body had aspects of it that we can't explain. And it wasn't long into that. I mean, it wasn't really till Vesalius that they had access to doing that kind of thing after Descartes got permission from the Pope to access human bodies for human dissection. I mean, human bodies for dissection to study human movement. But Jan van der Laar's drawings were dismissed as frivolous.
Yeah.
And unnecessarily elaborate and uncalled for in the anatomical world. And yet, those drawings have been reduced now to such iconographic simplicity that's supposed to be objective. It's not objective. And as an artist, you know, I remember where early in my time in the anatomy lab many years ago, I turned to John Sharkey and I said, John, look at this cadaver. Look at the spiral nature of the myofascial integration. It's not in the book. And he said, no, we call those cartoons. And I said, sorry? He said, we call those cartoons. And I said, well, hang on a minute. So we've gone so objective that we're now very often guided by iconic graphic design images of how muscles act on bones as levers, which they don't because they're not.
Right.
But we're so glued, and we both know that the classic education for every medical doctor and everyone in your physical therapy program was those iconic images. And I know I'm rattling a very big cage here, Carol, but what fascinates me is that what you're saying is that the measures, not that they're false, but they're so rigorous, they only give us a part of the picture, and that's fine if we remember that. But if we think it's the whole answer...
It's not even the essential part. You see, that sometimes what they measure is inconsequential to how the patient feels. So many patients have been discharged from hospital and rehabilitation settings in terrible shape because their numbers hit the mark. And they go home in intense pain, get addicted to opioids, and nobody asks the questions. Nobody asks the real questions, the important questions. That's not healing, that's fixing, that's living up to some sort of guideline that insurance companies have an awful lot to do with. We've really gotten off center so far that it's going to take a whole revolution of patients and clients to rise up and just not pay their money anymore. And go through terrible despair and lawsuits. And they tried to close down the program at one point in my school because some of my colleagues felt that I was teaching witchcraft, because I was teaching complementary therapies and subtle energy medicine. And they said this could not be consistent with the accreditation standards. And they called for the alumni to rise up and close the program.
What did the alumni do?
We were always top 10 in the country. They told me, and they told the chair of my program. The chair called me in and said, this is going to hurt us terribly. And I said, I disagree. You wait, the people that are going to be coming in to interview for us, for our new classes, are going to be the better students who are interested in this material. And I expect you to take a look at my science with me so that you can say back to them, this is how this fits the vision, the mission, and the goals of our program and the medical school. And I'll write it out for you. And she calmed down. And then the students started coming in to interview with that professor that teaches complementary therapies, because that's what they're interested in. So little by little by little, my book is selling a little bit better, and more courses are being taught. But and then of course, Rupert Sheldrake has been just vilified, kicked off TED Talks because of speaking blasphemy with the morphogenic resonance concept. And of course, this is an acceptable concept in many arms of rigorous science. That how do people across continents come up with the same idea and get awarded the Nobel Prize in the same year for the same discovery of the retrovirus that causes AIDS, one in France and one in the United States at the same time? There is a sense in which information is available to us in the cosmos that we can zoom in on. All the great inventors. I'm thinking of Einstein. I'm thinking of Alan Turing. I'm the founder of computers. The original minds, not the ones that pulled off those minds and developed. Carl Jung and the collective unconscious. Morphogenic resonance for Sheldrake. This idea that ideas are available to us in wave form, and we can have access to them through focused intuition. I love this story of Edison, Thomas Edison. He was a scientist in the United States who channeled electricity. He had questions, and he didn't understand where to look for the answers. So he had this place in Fort Myers, Florida, this getaway place, and he would take an afternoon nap, and he'd put a small cannonball in his arm, in his hand, and as he dozed off, the cannonball would drop, and he'd go from almost gamma back to beta, and then he would have a different point of view. So many great scientists have said those answers are available to us through the help of something that you and I talk about a lot, through the help of intuition. Mm. And Valerie Hunt, the marvelous physical therapist who wrote a groundbreaking book on energy and energy healing, left physical therapy because she couldn't get any support at all, went out to UCLA and had a lab of her own with private funding. She developed a Faraday cage that didn't let any energy in at all, sound or any waveforms at all. And then she'd bring people in and suck the air out, suck everything out, and then pipe in air for people to breathe. And then she would have people do structural integration on the person on a plinth. And she would have them hooked up to an oscilloscope that would record the color spectrum, any kind of color spectrum that changed as a result of the therapy. And they were reading the colors, of course. And then she brought people in who said that they could see auras, that they could see color. She brought them into the Faraday cage and had this structural integration going on. And they would say, well, there's a kind of a green aura here, and it goes into a purple aura here. And she matched it with what was happening on the oscilloscope. And so she said, this is information that's available to us when we advance our understanding of the limitations of our exteroceptors and start recognizing that there are waveforms that are available to us, just like dogs and cats can hear so much more than we can. But our technology hasn't caught up yet. But that shouldn't limit us from thinking about it.
Exactly.
And one of the things that she said was that there are scalar waves that are flying through the cosmos. And this is Erwin Laszlo did some studies on this, faster than the speed of light, much faster than the speed of light. coming into us all the time. And fascia acts as a little bit like a filament in a light bulb that slows down the flow of the electrons and that heats up. And in that heat, the light is formed. And of course, heat and light are waveforms that we can see, but we can't see these waveforms. She said, that's what fascia does. It goes through the fascia and it slows it down. And then those ideas are in there. And when we go into an intuitive state, when we have clinical intuition, those ideas pop up and think, let's try that. Or maybe it's this. And then, of course, you have wonderful Mae Wan Ho looking at the rainbow in the whir, seeing the rainbow colors in the larva. And you've got Gerald Pollack intuitively finding easy water, finding that water changes under certain circumstances. H2O becomes H3O2, and all of our cells are little batteries that are charging this energy. Those are the discoveries that are making what we only could intuit before real science, technological proof science. But of course, Pollack is experiencing what all great scientists who are on the leading edge experience. They get vilified. Long about my story, there was a member of the board of directors who wrote to this group of physical therapists that wanted alumni to close my program, said, Carol Davis teaches from science. Here's her book, read it. Here's James Oshman's book, read it. And then go be quiet, because this is the leading edge of science and you have no right to cast aspersions on this person. I felt much better then. They were quiet.
That's just wonderful to hear, because the idea that the human body is only a literal functioning biomechanical automaton, to use Descartes' term for a self-motivated body, is worse than limited when you consider that there's nothing mechanical about us, obviously.
Right.
And that the premise of the lever as an open 2-bar chain with a pin joint. I remember, I've told you this story, my dad, when he was with us, he was an engineer, a very brilliant engineer and a fighter pilot. And they practically had to build those planes. I mean, I know they didn't, but my God, I saw him in his 80s flying a Meteor again, and I couldn't believe the skill it takes, because the plane doesn't do it for you back in those days. And I remember him saying to me, go back to first principles.
Yes.
There are no open 2-bar chains in a living form. Where's the other open end? And, you know, the work that Donald Ingber did in that fabulous article he wrote in 1998 in Scientific American.
Right. Yeah.
About the structural tensegrity of every cell.
Yes.
And then you think of each cell as a high frequency icosahedron, because that's basically what it is. Mm-hmm. And then all those cells are inside pockets of fascial matrix that can express itself in so many different ways. You have this exquisite interface. And I think one of the big difficulties people have with, let's say, the idea of biotensegrity, for example, is that, first of all, it looks like it's arguing with biomechanics and it's trying to express itself through biomechanics, but it can't, because tensegrity is a description. The tensegrity icosahedron is a description, really, of one of the most fundamental aspects of force transmission in a living fluid form. And we're all living fluid forms, right? We are bound water, moving around, walking around.
Right.
And I remember...
It's a force field. It's a diagram of a force field.
Well, it's a hologram of a force field if you've got one in 3D, right?
That's
but
right. Okay.
I'm not correcting you, but I'm just saying the difficulty is that it's holographic rather than diagrammatic, because we can't reduce it to a few lines.
Right.
And
it's always 360.
Image.
Right. Yes.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the problems, that we're trying to explain in 2D something that lives in multi-D. That's the first thing.
Right.
The second thing is, we're still in the 2000, well, we're just emerging from the 2000-year era of reducing intuition to a removable feature.
Yes.
Like you can.
Yeah, control for the variable. It's a variable that will skew your results, so you have to control for it. You have to eliminate it.
And I do understand we're still working with principles of medicine. We're still being, I'm not saying throw the books out. I'm saying wake up a bit and smell some coffee around here, because the medical school training that teaches that fascia is a wrapping around muscles as if it's an arbitrary thing that you need to get out of the way in order to do surgery is unchanged pretty much for 400 years. And yet when I've met surgeons who work on people and do not understand why I understand what they're talking about, when they're explaining these subtle integrations of layers within the colon or whatever, when they're explaining a surgery to me, because, you know, I happen to be looking after somebody whose surgeon happened to try and explain it to them. And I remember sitting there once realizing that for all the training that surgeon's experience had trained him in what we learn in the lab with John Sharkey, for example, because we know that's what we're looking for. So we're in the privileged position.
Yes. Yeah.
They've acquired that knowledge through years and years of experience, but that is not their original training. Now, we're not talking about hairy-fairy parsley juice that we wave over people's heads and make them feel better.
No.
We're just saying this body is animated by a being, and that being's experience has consequence on their well-being. Is that not what we're saying?
Yes, exactly.
So even if we don't go as far as intuition and our ability to learn and understand things and know things instinctively and intuitively and without necessarily having gone through a very slow intellectual process of deduction, we're saying, you're just saying that the patient's experience is relevant to the healing process.
That's all I'm saying. And that they should be listened to deeply for what they say, and listening with the third ear for what they don't say.
Which is what we learn in therapies. I mean, you know, we've all taught with John Sharkey at the National Training Centre in Ireland. What a privilege, right? And that's part of the history taking of a good therapist, is to watch and observe and listen beyond what's being said. That doesn't mean you get to make it up and impose it on them. It means you listen in this qualitative way.
Right. It's called, now as it's moving forward in a new form to try to wake people up, especially in the medical field, it's given a name called narrative medicine. Listen to the patient's story. And the wisest physicians always said, if you listen long enough and well enough, the patient will tell you exactly what's wrong with them. You don't have to do much diagnosis. You can use your MRIs and CAT scans and so forth and x-rays, but basically, the information that you get from the patient should be treasured. And you should let the patient know that you hear them, that you say back to them, let me see if I understand what you're saying, so that they leave the session feeling as if they've been heard and met.
And why not?
Well, because other priorities have taken over, and follow the money is the bottom line. It's not financially efficacious to see less than 4 or 5 or 6 patients an hour. And you're thinking constantly as a practitioner, what's next? What's next? What's next? And you're doing a lot of pattern matching in your mind to try to get on with it, to what you're going to do. And so in my teaching, I spend a lot of time with my students, getting them to be quiet and put their feet on the floor. I wrote a book called Patient Practitioner Interaction, an experiential manual for developing the art of healthcare, and it is a workbook. And I introduce topics that will be front and center as part of the challenge of working with patients that they don't learn how to handle as particularly physical therapy students. The patient who's concerned about dying, the patient who's depressed and crying, the patient who's so angry that they're screaming in your face, the patient who blames you for everything, the patient who refuses to turn down the television and listen and be in connection with you, the patient who comes on to you inappropriately sexually, the patient who is unwilling to talk at all. You fix me. You're the doctor, you fix me. And these are the challenges of personhood and of people who are hurting that we don't teach as standard physical therapy practice. And so we have a course designed, and I have a workbook designed to help students primarily examine themselves and examine where their values lie and what their particular communication strengths are. So their fellow students give them feedback as they do group process stuff. I have faculty come down and role play patients. And then we have groups of students treating and then giving feedback. And a lot of the students are there unwillingly, but it was required before they went out into the clinic. And then after they came back from the clinic, I'd get long letters and personal interactions. I'm so sorry I dissed your class because everything that you taught us, I used. I used to have them journal, but I let that go because they complained so much about it that they weren't able to do the other material in the workbook. So I let the journal go. And I never graded the journal. I gave them feedback about what they were feeling and thinking. And, some of those 22 to 35-year-olds were 15, and some of them were 50 in their maturation levels. They revealed it very quickly in their interactions in class. I did a lot of group work. I never was, well, I shouldn't say never because many years I was, but then when I finally grew and learned about where the learning really takes place, it doesn't take place from them listening to me teach. It takes place from them reading some material and then discussing it with their fellow classmates and then role playing and looking at choices that they have for interacting in the moment in a role play situation for how to effectively handle this particular difficult situation so that I can get on with my muscle testing, so that I can get on with my gait training, so I can help this person be discharged and know that they're going to be safe on the stairs, so that I can understand, is this really a TIA or not? A transient ischemic attack? Is it really real or was it a little mini seizure or what? How can I know that? I can know that by the various tests that I can do. But until I do that, I've got to know that that person's connecting with me. And it's really the connection, isn't it? That's subtle energy. That's the subtle energy aspect. And, James Oshman has this marvelous book, Energy Medicine, the Scientific Basis. Energy, and it came out in 1996 or 98. And then this is the second edition, 99. Or no, maybe 99 was the first. Anyway, it's filled with the history of introducing the concept of energy that we weren't measuring adequately and energy that we didn't quite know how to measure yet. And that's subtle energy, the energy of the cosmos, the energy of subatomic particles, the energy of electrons and photons and protons impacting our body in big ways that we weren't paying attention to, that were tremendously important. And then I began to put that all together. And at the moment of conception, we are taught in school that the body follows the DNA blueprint. Well, It may use that as a blueprint, but the energy fueling the cell multiplication is energy coming from the sperm and the egg at the moment of conception, and it's in us fueling cellular dynamics until the moment we take our last breath. Within the nucleus and the cytoplasm, we have the combination of tension compression in all of that has structure and form inside of us. But also, flow is part of what makes that work. It's part of cellular respiration. It's part of lymphatic flow. It's part of all of our flows. What drives that? What's the energy that drives blood from our toes back up to our heart? It's certainly not the heart as a pump. We know that that's not right. We know that there's spiral motion, of course, but that motion, that flow to me is charged from the moment of conception. And when you say, well, when you might ask me or might not, where did it come from? And that's when we get into the cosmos and into what happened, what people say, what the opinion is, and those that I hold with, particularly Brian Swimme, Swimme, and his description of what happened in the moment of the creation of that which is observable to us as the earth and the cosmos began 13.7 billion years ago, that the Big Bang. And there are people who say, no, space always exists. The cosmos always existed. It didn't just all of a sudden happen. But I hold with Hubble, who first found that studying the Milky Way, it's expanding. And not only is it expanding, the whole cosmos is expanding. Everything's expanding. Well, where did that come from? And that was that theory. And some say, well, it's just metaphor. And I love your description of metaphor from your new book. Can I read it?
Of course you can.
And in part one, you say the history, awakening to the power of metaphor. The purpose of metaphor is to carry us across from an idea to an embodied experience. Metaphor literally has the power to carry us across from darkness of not knowing to the brightness of understanding, the enlightenment that expands our awareness. And then you say the problem with metaphors is that they so often overused and they get collapsed with reality. And what I love most is if I can just read one more thing from Brian Swimme, and this is the journey of the universe. This is why it's so compelling to me. And when he talks in the very beginning, the beginning of the universe, this is Journey of the Universe by Brian Thomas Swimme and Mary Evelyn Tucker. Let's begin at the very beginning. How did it all start? An awesome question, certainly, but it appears there really was a beginning. Some scientists refer to this as the Big Bang. Let's think of it as a great flaring forth of light and matter, both the luminous matter that would eventually become stars and galaxies, and the dark matter that no one has ever seen. All of space and time and mass and energy began as a single point that was trillions of degrees hot and that instantly rushed apart. And then he goes on later to say about Hubble and his finding that the Milky Way is expanding. And he says there's another fundamental force at play in our universe, a force of attraction, pulling things together, a force we call gravity. And the universe expanded and cooled, and gravity pulled some of the matter together to form the galaxies and stars. And these two opposing dynamics, expansion and contraction, were the dominant powers operating at the beginning of the universe. The expansion was in spirals, and the attraction was pulling back toward forming matter. And of course, then we just had the wonderful discovery of the Higgs boson, the God particle, that in the quantum foam, that the particles, there's a field that they go through, the Higgs field. And when those little quantum particles bang into one another, they get bigger and they take on charge. And then they form subatomic particles, electrons. And matter then is formed that way. Photons never have any charge. They're the waves. But the photons are also part of the energizing of our cells. And when you look at dissection and you open up the dissection, you see color. The very fact that you see color means that those photons are transmitting color to your retina, that there is color inside that, just like Mei Wan Ho found the rainbow in the worm. Those photons are at work, energizing, adding the extra energy, so to speak, to the mitochondria, because we can't get it all from ATP and from glucose and oxygen that we take in. And plants are the same. The plants take in the carbon dioxide, and the light, the photons, help produce then the glucose and the carbon dioxide, which we then eat, and then that becomes a part of us. But we wouldn't exist if the plants didn't exist. That's how we got our food. And our food has the electrons and the atoms in it from the cosmos. The plants pick it up from the earth and from the sky, from the air. And then they give
or
it to
our
us
oxygen. If it wasn't for the
oxygen.
trees,
That's
we
right.
couldn't breathe. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So I'm sorry. Thank you for indulging me. But, that's a belief system that I found energized by my understanding of fascia integrity, which I also agree with. I agree that you can't separate fascia and biotensegrity. They are united from the moment of conception. And that living, vibrating fascia web is the substrate within which this energetic flow, this tension compression dynamic is constantly forming and deforming and causing the structure and the form and the flow, the little mitochondria and the cytokines and the blood and the lymph and the breath and the steroids and the hormones and all the flows inside of us. That's the essence of life that comes at the moment of conception, not because of the DNA, because of that energy that came from that huge moment that I call the great radiance. That's my favorite term, the great radiance. That's Richard Rohr's comment. That's what he calls it, the great radiance, because it was light and it was spiral and it was magnificent, and it is the foundation of our life. So people say, well, she's getting a little spiritual here. Yep, I am.
Well, to me, the idea that we're not spiritual is silly. It's just silly. Because if the word spiritual means that people get so confused with what's spiritual, what's religious, what's this, what's that.
Yeah.
There's a very practical spirituality. And when I say spiritual, I'm talking about the anima animus that animates this form.
Yeah.
And it's self-organizing based on the pattern of its matter. And the pattern of that matter is fascia integral. And I can't name the energy, because for me, the energy comes from a source that we can't define. The life force and the energy can't be reduced to a name.
I see what you mean. Now
Do
I
you see
understand.
what I'm saying? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when in a way, it's ludicrous to reduce science to the artifacts of like a scan. I've experienced a doctor, looking at a scan and not looking at me.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I'm sure we all have. I tell this story that, I went to a doctor once with a damaged knee from a ski injury, and I had a brace from ankle to thigh. It was huge. So one huge leg that wouldn't bend and one normal leg. And I sat down with this leg stuck out in front of me. He did not look up from his computer. He said, "Which leg have you injured?" And I just burst out laughing. And I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Sorry?" And I said, "Are you serious? Have you just asked me which leg's damaged?"
Good for you. Stop him in his tracks.
And it was like, no, you're not going to do that. So for me, the idea that there's an inhuman or non-spiritual way of talking to another human being is ludicrous.
Yes, of course
Something's
it is.
present as missing.
Yes.
Because we already are. I mean, in Sanskrit, there's a lot of people are very familiar. I'm a yoga teacher. We talk about the Om, the universal sound. It's a beautiful sound. It's a very grounding sound. In Sanskrit, there's another word, the hue, and the hue means divine. And human is divine man.
Right.
Humor is divine love and laughter, in fact, because amour in French is to love, and humor is loving divine. So the idea that a
I
human
love that. That's great.
can somehow separate themselves from their beingness as if that's an
Yes.
asset of medicine. What's
Yes.
healing about that? Now, please don't misunderstand me. I totally agree with you that we need objective measures of some sort. And in spiritual science, we have to bring some very practical, check that out, try that, devise a method, work out the method. What are the benefits? What are the costs? How does it work? But you're applying it in a conscious awareness to a living principle. You're not reducing the living principle to its component parts in order to assess it.
Right, exactly.
You're not separating it from its beingness.
Yes.
And every single one of us animates our form, and it's the anima animus that we think we can cut out of the body that actually is present as missing in the lab, but that body's telling the story, the metaphorical, allegorical, literal, archetypal story through its morphology of that life lived. Now, we might not be able to interpret it very well. You know, the obvious things like somebody's had a tattoo and we know there's a story of a tattoo.
Sure.
We don't know the essence of that story, but we know that it took place. But all the other things, every wrinkle, every line, every deep smile line that we see still etched in those faces.
Every postural collapse.
Yeah.
You know, Jean-Claude has a new series of videos out.
Yes.
Little
yes,
12 videos that you may have seen them. And he's describing them. He describes the action of the vestibular network as mechanistic. And that jarred me. And so I wrote back to him and I said, Jean-Claude, these are wonderful, wonderful videos, and I want to use them in my work. But I get stopped when you use the word mechanistic. I said, there's absolutely nothing in us that is machine-like. And when you use the word mechanistic, it harkens back to the body as machine. And he wrote back and he said, I'm so sorry. He said, that's of course not at all what I meant. But what I meant was form a function that we can know what's going to happen, that it's very predictable, that the fibrillar structure will follow this pattern. He said, now, there are some things that are not predictable at all, and they're the self-emerging properties that happen spontaneously. But we know that the fibers are going to always become part of something else. We know that the fibers are always going to meld into, and he uses the term mechanistic to say we can predict that that there is no end. We can predict that these fibers are going to do this. And he wasn't willing to change the word. And I said, we have to find a new word because we have to move the language out of that which gives the stereotype that's wrong. It's just wrong and moves us back instead of forward.
This is so difficult. And I love you for saying this because, I mean, I love you for everything you said, but I love that because Jaap van der Waal said to me and John at one point, absolutely love what you're talking about, the self-assembling embryo, but don't use the word self-assembly because it sounds like an assembly line. And even that needs to be self-organizing because we are creating our organs. And you end up getting so self-conscious. And this is one of my difficulties with the route that biotensegrity has taken, which is, I don't know whether it's to appease the biomechanists and to forge relationships and make the changes in a collegiate way, which God knows everybody's involved has tried. Because what we're talking about is something that the fascia cannot not do. You know, we don't take off our wetsuit and discard it as skin on the floor. It stays inflated. It stays in form. And it is under tension because of the nature of the embryonic forming. You know, the potential bone grew much faster than the tissue that it grew from, and we grow from one. So when we say one net, one heart, one nerve, one muscle, as John Sharkey calls it, it really is a oneness. So what we're doing is seeking to restore a holism that never wasn't.
Right.
Never wasn't.
Yeah.
And we've got to be so careful because the language, as you've pointed out, is so interwoven with these mechanistic. I find myself saying it, Carol. I find myself saying, well, it's a sensory mechanism. No, take that back, strike. It's a sensory awareness. It's a sensory reception, perception, pre-ception. What do you mean by pre-ception? There's no such word. Well, think about it. How many times have you experienced sensing, you don't know how, before something's happened, that something's going to happen? How many times have you and your students and your clients told you, I absolutely knew that I was going to reach into that trunk and get that box, and I knew my back was going to go. I knew it was going to happen. And I'm furious with myself because I still did it.
Yeah.
It's that pre-sense. You perceive things because we don't only think in literal terms of A plus B.
Linear.
So we're not linear. We're non-linear biologic forms, as Steve Levin says. And it's true. This, I call it fascia tegral because I'm trying not to call it anything. But I am talking about fascia, and I am talking about the integrity of the fascia, whatever that is for that person. And it's unique to the individual. It's, as Jaap van der Waal pointed out to me, when I said anatomy is archetypal, he said, no, my dear, morphology is archetypal.
Yes.
And when you understand that you're dealing with an archetypal morphology, with your understanding of archetypes, you start understanding the whole picture. And the part of the understanding of metaphor for me came from Ian McGilchrist. And he talks about left and right brain. And you remember there's a chapter in my book by Helen Eady, which I love. And she talks about this power of metaphor and the left and right brain, and how our left brain thinking is reductionist. Everything is separate units. And the joining up of that and the use of metaphor is essential to the right brain to give context to that content. And in the left brain, we have stereotypes, fixed states.
Patterns.
So for me, biotensegrity is becoming a stereotype, like biomechanics is a stereotype. It's a fixed definition of something.
I can see why you would say that.
What we need is archetypes whereby the overall sense and typical way of is in place, but it contextualizes everything. So we've done work together on archetypal patterns. Every single one of us, according to Carolyn Mace and Carl Jung, has a set of archetypal patterns for our personality. Well, these are not rigid stereotypes. They can't be. If I have the queen and you have the queen, they have a completely different pattern.
Orientation, yes.
Orientation, feeling, awareness, whatever that is. And I think we're still in the left brain technology process. We're explaining technology through a left brain process. And when we go into AI, for example, we're talking about an interface that we don't realize we already own. We have a haptic interface at every single cell. And suddenly we've created something where we can understand what a haptic interface means, because it's how every single one of our phone screen works. But 20 years ago, you couldn't have had this conversation. So we're trying to have conversations about things that we've only just got the language for. We use language now like bandwidth, network, interface, haptic, sounds and haptics. You open your phone, it's the first thing you see, sounds and haptics in the settings. What does it mean? It's feedback. We have a feedback system. I nearly said mechanism because it's so deep to our language. And what we almost can't do, I think, what we're struggling with is giving ourselves, self with a capital S, credit for any wisdom in that haptic feedback. And it's already in us. It grew us. It's part of our instinct and it's part of our intuition, but it's not separate from the source from which we arise, which is nothingness. But what's the nothingness? And you'll talk to John Sharkey. There had to be something that created the. It's very, very difficult to discuss.
You get yourself into a corner then.
Well, not if you accept that you are not all that there is to you.
Right. That's the beginning.
And that, I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I've got the answers, Carol, for a moment. I've absolutely loved this sharing of what we're climbing towards and looking for the language between us and together with all the other people that we know and work with. And everyone's making such incredible contributions to this idea that we cannot reduce human form. Even if the story's 400 years old, we cannot reduce human form and function to a set of biomechanical rules as the sum of the anatomical parts, because here's the key to me, Jaap van der Waal, I say it in the book. We did not begin as parts that were put together like a machine. We began as whole.
We began whole. Yes.
And we remain whole. And we form our parts within that wholeness, right?
Right.
And we can't see it because we are it.
That's right. Fish can't see the water.
But hello. And there's a beautiful story of a monkey who says to the fish, "Oh my goodness, let me make you safe," as he reached into the water and took the fish out and put it safely into a tree.
Yeah, right. Yes. And unfortunately, that's what medicine has done to human beings.
Well, I think human bodies are animated by human beings, and at the very least, they deserve respect.
I agree.
And if we respected them in everyone, we would respect each other, no matter who and how we are. You know, all these classifications of able-bodied and the disabled-bodied, and with this human being in a body that manifests the way that it does. And there's presence. And I don't think we can live in this historical reduction to what has happened as proof of what's going to happen. Because as you said at the beginning, that's a mystery. And we can only be present in this moment. So where does that leave us?
Celebrating the moment.
Which, if anything, is a spiritual state.
Sure. That's all there is.
I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for spending time with me. And I know that you've got to go. We've gone up close to your time.
Pure joy. Yeah. Thank you. I love being with you always.